Hey guys, for someone who's looking into buying a mirrorless camera, especially if you are a content creator or do a lot of video shooting, you might be looking at Sony because they have a great line of mirrorless cameras and their autofocus is second to none. So if you're a content creator, especially if you're a solo content creator, you want that really good autofocus. And if that's the case, two of the models you might be looking at are the ZV E10 II or the a6700, which is $400 more expensive than this one. And the question I'm going to try to answer in this review, is it worth spending $400 more to get the 6700? And essentially, what more are you getting, or what are you sacrificing if you go with the ZV E10 II? Let's find out more. So let's talk about the differences between these two cameras. And to start with, the elephant in the room, the ZV E10 II is geared for video, for content creators, and the entire design philosophy revolves around that. Whereas the 6700 is more of a hybrid camera that can be used for photography and also for videos. That's not to say that the ZV E10 II cannot be used for photos. It can, it's just not designed to. And the most important reason why, there's no EVF, which is the electronic viewfinder, which is this thing over here that you put up to your face when you want to take a photo. With the ZV E10, there's no EVF, as you can see. You can still take photos, but you need to rely on the screen over here. And if you're out and about on a sunny day, it's less than ideal. So let's talk about what you do get in the ZV E10 that you don't in the 6700. And remember when I said it's geared towards video creators, first thing that the ZV E10 II has, which the 6700 doesn't, is this tally light over here. So if I start recording a video, there is a very apparent red light over here, and you can see it over here as well. Let me start and stop recording. So this is really important, especially if you are a solo content creator, because simply staring at the camera, you're going to notice if it's recording or if for whatever reason it stops recording. Another thing you get on the video-centered E10 are these two features over here. This over here is the background defocus, and over here you have product showcase mode, which again is very important as a video and especially a solo content creator. Let's start with the background defocus, which is this over here. So when you press that, it's going to say background clear or defocused. And the defocus is that really nice blurred background, the bokeh effect, which you can see over here. If you look at the lights behind me, they're out of focus. But essentially what creates that background defocus, that bokeh effect, is simply opening your lens to the widest aperture. And essentially this is what that button is doing. It's simply setting the aperture at the widest setting, which is something you can easily do with the 6700. Or any camera for that matter. And the easiest of which is you set it at A, which is aperture priority. And then if you look over here, that's the aperture. You dial it to the widest setting, which because this is a kit lens, it's at 3.5. So when you have the aperture at the widest setting, it's going to defocus the background. Now, the advantage of that background defocus button is more for beginners who don't know much about cameras and settings, etc., whereby in just a single press they can defocus or make the background clear. It's not that difficult to do if you simply set that aperture at the widest setting. Granted, it might be nice to have that with one click on the E10, but in my opinion, it's not that important or that big of a deal. What is very important in my opinion is that product showcase mode that you have over here, which the 6700 doesn't have, but again, that's not the full story. So normally when you're shooting in autofocus, you have eye detection on, and as you can see, it detects my eyes, it locks on those and keeps them in focus. What happens when I want to show you something and I put it in front of the camera, as you can see, it's not going to focus on that. It keeps locked on my eyes, and this is out of focus. And this is why you see creators often they hide their eyes or they put the item in front of their eyes in hopes that the camera focuses on that, as you can see. But it's a hit and miss. As you can see, the camera is hunting for my eyes. It's struggling to focus on this thing. There you go. But then in product showcase mode, if you put any object in front of the camera, it's going to quickly focus on that, as you can see. It's rather instantaneous. It's great. And as soon as you remove that, it focuses back on you. Now, interesting twist, the camera over here is not the ZV E10 II. This is the ZV E10 II over here, which means this is a 6700 that does not, in theory, have that feature. But as you can see, It kind of does. And this is how it works when you have the subject recognition turned off. It's almost the same as having that product feature. As you can see, focusing on any object closest to the camera is rather instantaneous. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you go to your menu on the 6700 and you scroll down to autofocus, the purple one, and you go down to subject recognition, you've got subject recognition and autofocus. Simply turning this off gives you something very similar to product showcase mode. Make sure you also have the AF transition speed set to 7, which is the fastest, and the subject shift sensitivity set to 5, which is also the fastest. Now, what you still miss is that dedicated button, so you don't want to fidget with the settings and go in deep into these menus every time you want to change it, but you've got a shortcut button over here, which is the C3 button, which you can assign that to. And to do that, open your menu and scroll down all the way down to the briefcase, and then go to Operation Customize and choose the second one. That's for the video mode, the custom key dial settings. And then on rear 1, button number 3, as you can see, is the trash can. I already have it set to subject recognition autofocus, but the first time you do it, you just click on that, and then you scroll all the way back up to the purple menu, the autofocus menu, go to number 3, subject recognition, and then select subject recognition and autofocus. And this is going to map that to the custom button 3, which is the trash can button. And now, as you can see, if I click this, it's going to turn subject recognition on, and I click it again, it's going to turn subject recognition off. So essentially you get almost the same functionality in the 6700. Now, the last thing that the ZV E10 Mark II does better than the 6700, it has better internal mics. I'll show you that as well in just a bit. It can capture audio from both the front and the rear of the camera. But my advice, if you're serious about video creation, don't use the built-in mic. Just use an external mic or a lavalier mic, wireless lavalier mic. Anything would be better than using a camera's internal microphone, in my opinion. Now, lastly, the ZV E10 Mark II is smaller. It does have a smaller body, as you can see, than the 6700. Not by a lot, but it is smaller and lighter. Although the 6700 is slightly heavier, I think it's more comfortable to hold. Because it is slightly larger, you have a better grip over here for your fingers than you do with the ZV E10 Mark II. So now that we've talked about what the ZV E10 Mark II has over the 6700, let's now talk about what the 6700 has, which the ZV E10 Mark II does not. So we've talked about the EVF. It has that electronic viewfinder. The 6700 also has IBIS, that's internal body image stabilization. And this is what stabilizes your videos if you're shooting handheld. The ZV E10 Mark II only does digital stabilization, which is not great. It uses digital software and crops in to try to stabilize, whereas the 6700 has actual physical stabilization because of IBIS. So I have both cameras set at the same distance in front of me, and steady shot is turned off. So this is without any stabilization. We've got both the 6700 on the right and the ZV E10 Mark II. I'm also going to be switching the audio source from both cameras so you can hear what the internal microphone sounds like. Now let's turn on steady shot to standard. So this is what the footage looks like with standard steady shot. I'm walking right now. Let's start jogging. And turn around. So this is with steady shot turned to standard. Now let's turn it to active and see the difference. So now I switched steady shot to active on both of them. Keep in mind, I am using the kit lens, which has optical stabilization. So despite the fact that the ZV E10 Mark II does not have IBIS, it is getting some optical stabilization from the kit lens. Now for the last test, I will switch to a prime lens that does not have active stabilization, so you can see the difference between optical and digital stabilization. Now you do notice there's a crop on both cameras, but the crop on the ZV E10 Mark II is more than that of the 6700. Now I'm gonna start jogging. And back to walking. with the steady shot set to active on both cameras. So now I put on the ZV E10 Mark II a prime lens. This is a 15mm prime lens that does not have optical steady shot, so there's no optical stabilization there. Now ignore the focal length because that is a 15mm prime lens, whereas the kit lens on the 6700 is at 16mm. So there's that 1mm difference in the focal length. So for now, ignore the cropping and focus more on the stabilization. We've got active stabilization on both. The 6700 has IBIS, whereas the ZV E10 Mark II right now is relying completely on digital stabilization. So now I'm walking and I'm gonna start jogging. And this is the effect of digital stabilization on the ZV E10 Mark II and IBIS on the 6700. Let me know in the comments section what you thought about the stabilization on both. The 6700 also can shoot 4K at 120 frames per second. The ZV E10 Mark II can only do 4K at 60, though it can shoot 120 frames per second, but that is limited to 1080p. Now, if you're wondering if there's a difference between 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second, take a look at these two clips of snow falling. One is shot at 60 frames per second and the other at 120 FPS. And for slow motion, there's a big difference in my opinion when you go 120 frames per second. One thing to mention though, when you're shooting 4K at 120 on the 6700, there's a 1.5x crop, so it is gonna crop in and you would need a lot of light in your environment to get good quality videos. And while both can do 4K 60, the 4K 60 on the 6700 is not cropped, whereas on the ZV E10 Mark II, it's slightly cropped, so that's another difference. On the body itself, there's a very important addition on the 6700, which we don't have over here, which is the PASM dial over here, which lets you very quickly change between program, aperture, shutter priority, or manual mode, and you even have 3 shortcuts or custom modes to customize to your likings for each of the video or camera modes, which is really nice and really handy. The ZV E10 Mark II does not have the PASM dial, which means if you want to change any of the settings, you need to go into menus, which is slightly cumbersome. So this is a huge plus for the 6700. There's also more shortcut buttons. So you've got the C3 over here, you've got the C2 over here, and you've got the C1 over here. So there's 3 shortcut buttons that you can configure, and you've got 2 dials over here. You've got the rear one over here, which the E10 has as well, but you also have a front dial over here, which is missing from the ZV E10 Mark II. Another thing the 6700 has and the ZV E10 does not is a mechanical shutter, which could come in handy if you're shooting a lot of fast moving objects. The ZV E10 does not have a mechanical shutter, it's just an electronic shutter. The 6700 has an AI chip, which means it offloads some of the processing power from the processor to that AI chip, but also it gives you much more autofocus options, where it's limited on the ZV E10. You get on the 6700 planes and animals and a lot more options for autofocus. And lastly, the 6700 is weather sealed, whereas the ZV E10 Mark II is not. So if you do plan on using this outdoors where it might rain, for example, this is something for you to consider. And the ZV E10 Mark II has a zoom rocker over here, which some people love, some people hate, but this is gonna let you zoom in and out easily from over here if you have a power zoom lens, whereas the 6700 does not. However, if you're using a power zoom lens like the kit lens over here, it does have that power zoom over here on the lens itself. Granted, it is easier if you have it over here because you can do a one-hand operation, zoom in and zoom out, but also means you might knock this accidentally while you're using the camera, which is gonna inadvertently zoom in when you don't want it to. So now that we've highlighted what the differences are between the ZV E10 Mark II and the a6700, we go back to the question we're trying to answer. Is it worth paying $400 more to get the 6700, or should you get the ZV E10 Mark II? And to answer that, you need to think what your use cases are and how you're going to be using the camera. If you're going to do a lot of photography, or you might be out in the elements where waterproofing and weather sealing is important, I'd say you're probably best investing a little bit more in getting the 6700. Now, if you're primarily going to do video as a content creator or otherwise, then it really depends. For example, if you really need 4K 120 frames per second, then you're not going to get that with the ZV E10. Also, if you're going to do a lot of handheld videos and you don't plan on buying a dedicated gimbal, then the IBIS in the 6700 is going to make a difference, whereby the ZV E10 Mark II does not have that. But if you're just starting out as a content creator and this might be your first mirrorless camera, then my recommendation is going to be go for the cheaper one, save that $400 and invest that in a better lens. So the kit lens is good for portability. You've got a wide range of focal lengths. You can zoom in and zoom out. But if you're serious about videos or even photos, I would highly recommend you get a prime lens. That's going to give you a lot better images, a lot better video. So I would definitely recommend in that case, you get the ZV E10 Mark II and use some of that $400. You probably don't need to use it all to get a prime lens. So if you go to Amazon and search for Sony E-mount prime lenses, and you're going to want to be looking at FE lenses because you have an APS-C sensor, not a full frame. You see there's a lot of option, and even the Sony 50mm 1.8 is at $200 and is going to be great. But there's also options from other brands as well. Sigma has options, Viltrox has options, so there's a lot of options for the E-mount system for Sony. Now, if you're just getting started and are in a budget, I would recommend looking at the Viltrox lenses. I think they provide very good value for money. If you want to shoot talking and videos, for example, I would recommend you look at the 23mm. This is going to be the equivalent of a 35mm on a full frame once you factor in the 1.5 times crop. Or if you're into portrait photography, for example, then look at the 56mm. Again, once you factor in the 1.5 times crop, it's going to be the equivalent of an 85mm full frame, which is one of the typical lenses used for portrait photography. Now, f1.4 is going to be great. It's going to give you that smooth, creamy bokeh, but if you don't want to pay that much, you can also get the f1.7, which is at $150 and is going to be miles better than the kit lens. So that's it for me. I hope this video might have helped you in your decision whether you want to go for the ZV E10 Mark II or the 6700. I will put links in the description to the product pages of these two cameras. These are affiliate links, so if you do decide to purchase any of them, I would appreciate it if you would go through my links. I may earn some commission at absolutely no extra cost to you, but this will greatly help support the channel. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. And as always, if you like the video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel, as this encourages me to continue producing content. Until next time, cheers.